Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross, and I came up with one essential question for every single player in the top 20. Alex Gruskin will join me on Monday Match Analysis so we can discuss all 20 of the questions that I came up with. By the way, Gruskin doesn't know the questions coming in. Only I know the questions. We're going to split this up into two parts. You'll hear early on in the show. The goal was to get it within an hour. Not even close. Should have known better than to try that one. But it's going to be two parts, 1 through 8 in the rankings in part 1, 9 through 20 in the rankings in part 2. I hope you enjoy. And without further ado, here's Alex Gruskin. We are joined once again by Alex Gruskin, the esteemed editor-in-chief at Cracked Racquets, which was formerly an Indianapolis company. And for the first time, we are now speaking to Gruskin from Atlanta, Georgia. You just moved, and moving is stressful, and it's a lot. And I really didn't think you'd be able to do a podcast with me like 2 days after getting to Atlanta, but here you are. So I appreciate it, my friend. And how's it treating you so far?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Yes, this is my very first podcast. Even before we've recorded anything for Cracked Racquets here in the ATL, you called. I was happy to answer. And if I were to rate my top 3 least favorite things, number 1, an obvious one, people who say people don't talk enough about X. Like, that's the thing I hate more than anything. Number 2 is moving, like, without question. There's nothing I hate more than packing boxes and unpacking boxes. You think you're done unpacking, and then 3 weeks later, you realize you forgot to get a paper towel roll, and so off to Target we go. I mean, again, this is my first heating and gas and electric bill and water bill where I've been the only name on it. I'm living alone. I'm terrified. And so the moment you texted like, hey, you want a podcast? I was like, I need any sort of company, even if virtual. Thus, I'm happy to be here. And as always, happy to see you and be here with the listeners.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're becoming a real adult. That's good to see.
29 years old. It's about time.
If you could say that. Do you remember when we did this last year? We went through every player, and it's basically, what is the essential question that faces each individual right now, at least in my mind, right? It's subjective. What is the question? But it's just a really good way to look back on 24 and think about, well, what does that mean for 25? And I thought it was a great chat around this time last year. Only thing, it was a 2-hour chat, and I'm hoping to cut that in half.
Yeah, that's fine. I always defer to you for those sort of things. I will try to be efficient with my answers here today. It's an excellent exercise, and this is my favorite thing about the month of December. Yes, we have no tennis, but it's the only time on the calendar where we have no significant tennis. So you actually can take time to take a deep breath, reflect on what you learned, run through the numbers, which won't change on you every day with a new match. It's one of my favorite exercises. I am very happy to be asked back. And again, I will try to keep things moving as we got a lot of players to cover tonight.
Hey, I mean, don't worry. It's my job. I'm the host.
Okay.
But I apprate it. All right.
Just throw
we're going to go.
X. Just be like, all right, that's enough on that player. And I will be sure to stop my answer there.
It's a great system. We're going to go in order of ranking. All right. So current world number 1, Jannik Sinner. That's where we start. The question I wrote is, what can go wrong? Because we know how incredibly dominant and statistically immaculate this season was. And history would suggest you have a year like that. You have a year where you win 92% of your matches. And unless you're mid-2000s Roger Federer, you're going to do worse the next year. Like, it's not going to be that good again. But where I struggle with Jannik, and I guess this is natural after a season that was as good as the one that he just had, and we can talk about the possibility of suspension or not, but like when I rack my brain about like, okay, where might he be vulnerable? What area might he fall off? It's really difficult for me to get there, especially because Gruskin, the mental aspect of Jannik Sinner, short-term within a single match, long-term over the course of a season, it just seems dynamite and foolproof. And like, that's why he went the whole year without losing to anybody ranked lower than 12.
Yeah, it's a really great question to ask. And earlier I mentioned the three things I dislike the most. The third on that list would be talking about players who have flunked drug tests. And then that becomes a major topic of
Yeah.
conversation. And, oh, they were treated differently. And by the way, it's a very worthy conversation. It's one certainly we should be having this offseason as we try to address some of the flaws we have right now in professional tennis. But you mentioned the keynote. You look in the 21st century, Federer from '04 to '06, 3 straight seasons of 90-plus win percentage. I mean, what are we even doing here? It's why he is in consideration for greatest of all time. He did it again in 2017, which might actually be his most impressive feat. But again, we can have that conversation at a different time. You look for Rafa. He eclipsed the 90% threshold in 2017 as well as in 2013. And then, of course, you had Djokovic do it 2015, 2011 as well. I mean, to ask Sinner to put forward, what did I just run you through? 6 examples. So it would be the 8th 90+% win percentage season we have seen of the century. And to ask him to do that back to back, that feels unreasonable. And so if there is a little bit of regression next season from an overall top line standpoint, I don't think that should be held against him. Now, again, if he continues at this pace, I always like to joke around not eliminated from the greatest of all time discussion. Maybe we can start even having fun with that sort of conversation, given his dominance on hard courts, given how easy it seems to be for him to repeat his game style, match in, match out. Again, the first guy since that 2000s Federer to win a set, in every match he played this season. The last anecdote I would tell is I was speaking with Caruso on our Cracked Rackets podcast. I believe it was the Cracked Interviews podcast. And, I asked him, Alcaraz, Sinner, how would you rate the two moving forward? And he just continued to repeat how impressive the ball Jannik Sinner hits off both wings as his rally ball. His 75% ball is unlike any neutral ball I have seen from the ground, even from prime Federer, even from prime Rafa, prime Djokovic. And that's not to say they couldn't amp things up to that level, but it's on every ball. And again, the fluidity, the fact that these limbs, just these levers, he seems to cover the corners so well. What's next for Jannik Sinner is a fascinating question, because even a one slam 2025 still feels like a victory, right?
Sure. I mean, I guess it depends what's around that. I feel like 2 would probably be his goal. Like, let's try to do it again. Let's run that back. But I guess the crazy thing is, as much as history would suggest he's going to regress compared to what he just did, you look at some of the things that were going on, clay court season, grass court season. Was he mentally affected by the doping cloud that was secretly, hanging over his head? He says he was. Darren Cahill says he was. The evidence is there. If you look at how he was breaking down physically over that period of time, I think he's going to surprise people. Anyone who thinks like Sinner isn't good on clay and he's not good on grass and he's only good on hard court, like anyone who's coming in with that mentality, I think at a certain point is going to be proven dead wrong. So as crazy as it is, there's even reason to think like, oh yeah, like 2024 Sinner could have been better. Like there's a world.
I mean, but here's the thing again, 3 of the 6 losses on the year were to Carlos Alcaraz this season. And, again, he had a great clay court season. Like, he didn't play that much, so maybe that is the opportunity for growth. He only played Monte Carlo, Madrid, and Roland Garros. And part of that had to have been the cloud hanging over him. I don't know why otherwise he would have played such a light schedule over that time period. But again, Rome is in there.
He was feeling the hip. He was feeling the hip at that time.
No, their injuries for sure also played a factor, and I appreciate you bringing that up as well. But, again, there is room for growth for Jannik Sinner in the clay court season, even if there is a regression from the Miami title, the Rotterdam title, the Australian Open title. By the way, in that midst, why couldn't he go further than Indian Wells semifinal? Why couldn't he go and play in Acapulco or play a Dubai if needed, because the Australian Open, he lost a few rounds early? There is plenty of runway for Jannik Sinner to duplicate from a points perspective the success he had in 2024, even if it's through a different path over the first half of the season. But to your point, his clay court season was really good. Okay, he lost to Tsitsipas 3 sets Monte Carlo semifinals. Fine. Withdrew from Felix in the Madrid quarterfinals, so didn't lose there. 5-set loss to Alcaraz, where that first set he played was breathtakingly awesome. And so anyone who doesn't think he has a high level on the clay courts, go rewatch the film. Yeah, set 2 was awful.
Yeah,
Set 4 was awful. Set 5 was awful. But the level was there, and I don't think there's any reason he can't sustain that. Again, that's what makes Jannik Sinner such a scary and tantalizing in the best way prospect moving forward, is as powerful as it is, it's just so easily replicable for him match in, match out. He proved that over the course of 79 matches this season. Again, I don't remember what the question was, what could go wrong or what's next, but
what could go wrong, right? Like, because I'm trying to think, like, what about Jannik Sinner suggests that, or what we just saw suggests that it might go a little bit downhill for him. Nobody's suggesting that he's going to fall off a cliff or anything, but like, essentially, I almost see, and it's insane, I see more reasons why he's better next year than he's worse next year. Just given, like, you want to actually dig into those losses, and I don't want to go too in depth here, but Tsitsipas, you have a terrible lines call in the 3rd set when he's up a break, and Alcaraz, the fit, exactly, throw up the X. Alcaraz, the fitness wasn't there in that match, and it wasn't just the hip injury. The guy got terribly sick in the weeks leading up to Roland Garros, and he didn't have his fitness. And then he got sick again at Wimbledon when he lost to Medvedev. And look, that's like part of the game, right? So people are going to be like, excuses. And it's like, well, I mean, it's durability, right? Like that's what it is on tour. But I just think I think for sure we're going to get a better clay court season and a grass court season than we got from Sinner last year.
Yeah, you nailed it. What if he also decides, I don't know, to play Canada next season and pick up some points there, another opportunity for growth? You mentioned the big word, durability. Like, that's the only question mark remaining. And to even have that question mark brought up after a season where he played 79 matches and won a set in all of them, all of his major losses, and there were only 2 of them, each in 5 sets, the tennis feels very replicable. Like, I don't know if I have a question about the on-court. It's the off-court. It's the injuries that have continued to plague him. But plague even feels too hyperbolic of a word. Like, continue to nag him. Like, I don't know what to. Yeah, it's like
no, it is. It used to plague. It used to plague, and now it nags. Right? Yeah. There's improvement, and like, at the end of the day, if you're going to tell me what's the number one key for Jannik Sinner's success in 2025, it is endurance and durability. Because if I look at his losses from last year, that's the common thread, other than Carlos Alcaraz being amazing at tennis.
Can I just point out the common thread, though, is he ran out of durability in 2 5-set losses to Alcaraz and Medvedev. Like, not straight set losses, 5-set losses in those matches. I agree. And again, it's up.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
It's such a fascinating question, because no one this year, other than Alcaraz, who just can out-hit him, hurt Jannik Sinner from a tennis perspective. And that is the number one offseason, is how do I break this guy down? And you might need an even smarter brain than myself or yourself, Gill, to answer that question, because no one could break him down in 2024.
Yeah. Let's move on to the world number 2. And by the way, like, we talk about this and of course there is a chance he misses time with the WADA appeal. It's a possibility. If you want to break down on that, that's up on YouTube. You can look that up if you want. But let's go to Alexander Zverev. The question is he going to do the thing, right? Is he going to do the thing? Because here's my main point on Zverev right now, Gruskin, and I was there with Daniil Medvedev earlier in his career as well. I don't think he needs to get better to win a major. Like, I don't think he needs to get better. He's there. His game's good enough. He just needs to do it. So that comes down to, one, like, when you're in that moment, do you summon the guts? Do you summon the nerve management? And do you actually get it done? And also, does opportunity open up? Because sometimes we see when players win their first slams, whether it be Carlos Alcaraz at the U.S. Open or Daniil Medvedev at the U.S. Open in 2021, the year before that, sometimes things go down and it makes it a little easier on you.
Yeah, look, I'm going to give you some numbers real quickly. You tell me, is this Sasha Zverev or Dominic Thiem? Matches played over the course of their prime 7 years. 79, 79, 69, 75, 40, 82, 86. That's per season. You want to give me a guess?
Yeah, is that Zverev?
Well, I should have played a joke on you and said, no, that's actually Dominic Thiem and Zverev's much lower. But no, that's Sasha Zverev's workload. And what's so amazing is the conversation about him is never, oh, he broke down physically. Like, oh, his body didn't hold up other than the season where his ankle snapped. And for someone his size to have turned into what he has on court with the movement and the fitness and just that never being in question in the cornucopia of 5-set matches that he finds himself in at majors, it is ridiculous. I do agree with you. Again, coming off of a season where he held 90% of the time over an 86-match sample size, that's going to work. And again, we've talked about this before. It's the first time in tennis history someone had a problem with their second serve, and their solution to it was, I'm just not going to miss the first serve anymore. You look for Sasha Zverev last 5 seasons, 68%, 67.5, 71.6, 70.5, and 71.3. So again, I should have just said those last 3. For 3 straight seasons, he has made over 70% of his first serves. His first serve win percentage from 73.4 up to 76.7 during that time. And it's what
hitting it bigger than anybody.
Absolutely.
Other than Petchy Pericard.
And the combination of winning free points like that, as well as being able to blend in the physicality and the shot tolerance and his willingness and eagerness to extend rallies and be defensive. I would also mention, and this is the little discussed piece, he is so much better as a volleyer than he was 7 years ago. It's just a different story now because he not only, there was a time where he knew where to be and what to do and couldn't execute it. And certainly if it's 6-all in the set or anything after 4-all in the set, he's probably going to float that volley a little bit more than he should. But he has become a good volleyer, not a competent volleyer, a good volleyer. And to have that skill set behind his first serve, behind what he can do with the ground strokes, Sasha Zverev is holding serve over the course of a best-of-5 match. The problem is, and it's been the same problem for 7 years, what happens when it's 4-all in the set, 5-all in the set, 5-6 in the set, and he's serving? You're going to get a shaky Sasha Zverev game. And with Sinner continuing to improve and Alcaraz continuing to improve, to get back to your central question, is his good, which is in my opinion the best player we have ever seen without a major title on the men's side, is that good enough to get the job done? I think the answer is yes. I have seen him beat both Alcaraz and Sinner at the majors. I know the tennis is good enough. Mentally, can he do the damn thing? I think we have a 6-slam window, maybe even 8 slams. I'll say all of 25, 26, because by the time Sinner's 25 and Alcaraz is 23, I'm sorry, I'm going to swear, you're fucked. You're just not winning majors during that time. He's got a 2-year window with Medvedev maybe slightly on the decline, Ruud and the rest of the next-gen bunch just not threatening the top tier as consistently as you thought they would. This is the window. Sinner has question marks off the court. Alcaraz is unbelievable on the natural surfaces. You can get him on the hard courts. He's got 8 more chances, in my opinion. So I agree. I think that's the number one question. We're going to have our Make or Break All-Stars show. You're going to come on the Mini Break podcast to do that. You could argue he's number 1 on the list of make or break, and not in the sense of will he be top 5, because he is one of the 5 best players in the world. It's can he do the damn thing? And it just feels like there has to be urgency because, again, those top 2 guys, they're ridiculous. It's now or never for Zverev.
He's Thiem's age, by the way. He's 27. So that's when Thiem won his first major. So I draw that parallel. Look, 5-6 years ago, I would have said, I've never seen anybody win a major who has a shaky second serve and a shaky forehand. And even when he was winning Masters 1000s titles and everyone was saying Zverev is a lock to win a slam, if you talk to me in 18 or 19 or 21, I'm like, look, I'm sorry, but those are massive holes. And the reason why I've gone from those 2 shots have to be better, or I don't want to hear it about a major, to he's good enough. He's there. He's ready. Is because I now trust the second serve, and I now trust the forehand, at least unless it's a major final at 5-all in the 5th, as you discussed. So, and then you have questions.
But it's not even the distrust of the forehand. It's that it sits up, his forehand, the depth's not the issue anymore. It's that he stops turning into it. It's that he sits the ball up short and assumes a position 10 feet behind the baseline and just becomes so defensive. I couldn't echo your point more. There are no technical questions anymore for Sasha Zverev. It is, and by the way, the biggest thank you I have to offer to the Gill Gross listeners and the Gill Gross commentators is to knock me out of my Zverev into the Zverev phase.
We bullied you into it. Good.
You successfully. Sometimes bullying works. That was an instance where it did. So shout out to the listeners. But it's all about the brain. Like, it is all about that square box of footage on his shoulders where can Sasha Zverev get the job done? I think it's the biggest question mark of 2025 because he was the most consistent player of the season, not named Jannik Sinner, and yet again, couldn't get the job done even when the opportunity was there for him. So I think that's one of the biggest question marks going into next year.
Number 3, Carlos Alcaraz. My question is consistency in the cards? I think that's the reason that's a question is because for some guys, that's just not who they are. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be hot streaks and cold streaks. There's going to be a first set at a major in the first week where you might be playing Jesper de Jong at Roland Garros and you're thinking, what the heck just happened? Like, can you make a ball? And then, you turn it on and it's unplayable, right? So Alcaraz's 2024, by the way, did you see the clip in the press conference with Sloane Stephens?
Mwah. Yeah,
Carlos was like, it's been a difficult year. And Sloane's like, tell me about it. 2 slams. But yeah, at the end of the day, like as much as 2024 was a success for Carlos Alcaraz, when you win 2 slams, it's a success. And the conversation really ends right there. There were so many fluctuations. Do you think that that's something that gets smoothed over? And I think this is the question. Does that get smoothed over or is that just who he is?
Okay, I have 2 thoughts off of that, and I will be brief with both of them. First thought is I just reject the premise of your question. So that's a good place for us to start, right? Mm-hmm. Last 3 years, 57-13, 65-12, 49-12. All 3 seasons over an 80% win percentage. What the fuck are we talking about when we say inconsistencies for a kid who, by the way, turns 22 in May? Like, this is a guy who at the biggest events of every all season long, sans the U.S. Open, and if you want to say the Tour Finals, fine, sans the Tour Finals, he showed up in the biggest of ways. He played in the best match of the season in the Olympic final against Novak Djokovic and put forward just a fantastic performance, albeit in the 6-6 loss. He wins the French Open, Wimbledon titles. And by the way, in getting to that Olympic final was knocking on the door of the Rafa treble, would have been the only other guy to win all 3 events in the same summer, and to do that at 21 years old, to even be knocking on the door for it, like, that's why we joke around. He's not eliminated from the greatest of all time discussion yet, because 4 major titles over the last 3 seasons, an Olympic silver medal, a long reign as world number 1, and then, oh, by the way, the biggest carrot probably at the end of the stick, he went 3-0 against the guy who is going to the matchup that is going to define the prime of his career in beating Jannik Sinner in every match that they played this season. Even at the end of the season in Beijing, post U.S. Open, post fall of Jannik, Carlos Alcaraz still got him in a hard court final in 3 sets. Got him at Indian Wells to blunt his early season momentum as well. So I guess I don't reject your premise. I reject the premise of anyone who's calling this a down season for Carlos Alcaraz. That'd be where I'd start.
Right. And I wouldn't call it a down season, but if we're going to talk about, like, look at his record, why are we calling him inconsistent? We're comparing him to his rival, right? Like, yeah. We're going to put him next to Jannik Sinner. And the fact is, first of all, there's been 2 seasons where we've seen something similar. We see a very intense loss to Novak Djokovic, a very emotional loss to Novak Djokovic. Last year it was in Cincy. This year it was at the Olympics. And then it's kind of a dude who can't find it for the next month. So, like, he stunk in August, right? Alcaraz was bad in August. He played bad against Gael Monfils. A lot of players would have beaten him on that day. He did not play well in the first round of the U.S. Open against Lee Tu. He happened to win. He did not play well against Botic van de Zandschulp. He lost in straight sets to the world number 74. If you talk about Jannik Sinner not losing to anybody ranked lower than 22, I mean, Alcaraz had a loss to Nicolas Jarry, and he had a loss to
Botic.
Tomas Mahac, and he lost to Hugo Humbert. And I mean, yeah, like, so that's the difference, right? Is it inconsistency by regular standards? No. Of course, we're going to compare him to the very best there is. And like Sinner was Mr. Steady, Alcaraz for 2 years in a row now. There have been times where it's like, oh, he's not right. He's not himself. Like in the last 14 months, I don't think there's been one tournament where you're just like, wow, Sinner is a shell of himself. Like, guy doesn't have it.
Well, that gets me to point two I wanted to make, and I think you've set up the framing perfectly. Carlos Alcaraz, when he loses his matches, and it's funny, him and Iga Swiatek share this characteristic. When he loses matches, in my opinion, and I'm curious what you think, it's because he hits himself out of those matches. It's because he can make magic happen so frequently that he expects that of himself. And down 2-5, rather than doubling down upon his physicality, which we know is within him, given the improvisational skills that he has, rather than hit the 75% neutral ball backhand cross court, rather than hit the 75% neutral ball inside out, he goes for the kill. He goes for the drop shot. He goes for the explosive down the line or inside in. He tries to do that thing that only he is capable of doing right now in men's tennis. And to ask him to slow down, which was my first inclination. It's funny. Gill didn't send me the questions, listeners, before today's show. I asked him not to because I like the surprise of it all, but I did try to forecast in my mind what we might discuss. And I thought you might ask, what's the next piece for Carlos Alcaraz? And I thought in my head, okay, I'm going to come on and say this great monologue about how he does need to slow things down, about how if he just relied upon that physicality, that 75%, boy, could he just work his way through matches maybe even more efficiently. And then I just thought, God, that's fucking stupid, because you're asking to put a silencer on a shotgun. Like, why would you tell the guy who can do all of these special things, hey, man, like, slow down? Like, that's the last thing you want to tell that player this early in their career. You want them to build that aggressive instinct. You want that to be the thing they turn to, particularly when under pressure and under the gun. You want them to build that instinct and inclination to play to win. At the same time, Alcaraz treads that fine line between too much and, oh my God, he is special. And I just wonder if maybe it is finally time where you can say, hey, like, Carlos, you can slow down. Like, you don't always need to be going 85. Like, sometimes 74 is good enough on this highway.
Yeah. And everybody look, Nadal and Djokovic were masters at it. They can be having their worst match ever. They can be at their D level. They're still not going to be unforced error machines. It's just not going to happen. It's not in their vocabulary, so to speak, to give anything away easy. And Alcaraz has that. Like, there is a world, there are matches every year where, okay, he didn't make it very hard on his opponent. He didn't use the fact that he's the fastest player in tennis because he just missed everything. But you're also so right about, and I think Ferrero has been very careful to not try to turn a magician into a robot. Let the magician be a magician. I actually think, I don't think changing his style is the key to unlock more consistency. I think just being mentally a little bit less up and down might be the answer, because again, I've seen the pattern 2 years in a row now. He takes a tough loss and it feels like it takes him a month to get over it. And that's the kind of thing I think with maturity and experience, he's going to learn how to avoid that pitfall, because you do need to take your lumps. You do need to know how to get punched in the face. And I don't know that Alcaraz knows how yet. So that's what I would say.
That's an excellent point. The final thing I would say is I didn't mean to imply he should change his game style. There's a difference between telling someone to slow down and reimagine how it is they go about attacking someone, and he does not need to reimagine. But my last point I would make quickly, I mentioned the records earlier, the last 3 seasons, 81.4, 84.4, 80.3%. We haven't seen him put his nuts on the table yet. Like, we haven't seen the Alcaraz, hey, I'm here. Like LeBron 2012 when he won that first title with the Heat, or, again, pick a Brady season, pick any of these great athletes we've seen, the Phelps 08 Beijing run. Like, he hasn't had that run yet. He came really close this summer, and yet still ended the season 49-12. We haven't seen the calendar end-to-end, hey, here's my '05 Federer, here's my 2015 Djokovic, here's my 2010 Nadal, here's my season to submit to the all-time great season resumes. He hasn't had that year yet. There is no reason 2025 can't be that year.
The reason he hasn't had that year is because there have been too many bad months.
Yeah, you said it perfectly earlier. Yeah, you're right.
All right, Taylor Fritz is number 4, which really sneaks up on you. I mean, because he got to 4 and then obviously the season ended, so we haven't really had a chance to be like, all right, Australian Open, Taylor Fritz has his own quarter, because that right there is something else. Yeah. So, but the question now is this the real ceiling? Is this the actual ceiling? Because everybody kind of knows. I don't know that anybody said Taylor Fritz's ceiling is top 5. I think most people were saying it's probably 8 in the world, maybe 7. If you were really optimistic, you'd think, okay. And I actually think he did sniff 5 briefly a couple years ago, but then he was out of that position pretty quickly. It's just I think low end top 10 was, I think, where even the Fritz like optimists would sort of land, and I would say that's where I was. So he's surpassed a lot of expectations. Is this the real ceiling now? 4 in the world, I'd say tier 2. Is tier 2 the actual ceiling?
That's so fascinating, because I was going to come at you with the same question of, okay, but now have we seen Fritz's ceiling? Because it does feel like that's been the conversation you and I have had, and more broadly, people in tennis circles have had about him for the last 3 seasons. And I would highly recommend everyone goes and reads Jeff Sackman of Tennis Abstract's piece, The Newly Opportunistic Taylor Fritz, which he wrote in early November, which kind of talked about the big jump he took this year. And where that big jump occurred was at the majors. Before this season, he had never eclipsed 8 wins in a single season at the majors in total. And just to do some quick math for all of you, 4 majors a year, you win 8 matches, you're averaging a 3rd round appearance at each major. That's just not good enough for a guy in Taylor Fritz, who we saw win an Indian Wells title, who we know his serve, his weapons, how many balls he puts in play on the return. We know he can threaten, if not the very best, everyone beneath that first tier in professional tennis. And then this season, he rips off 17 wins at the majors. And again, he gets signature victories in beating Zverev twice, in beating Francis Tiafoe in that All-American semifinal, which doesn't sound that impressive, but we cannot forget the added caveat of that was to be the first American since Roddick to reach a major final. And that had been the cloud hanging over American men's tennis for 2 decades now. And for him to win that match, that absolutely qualifies as a signature victory. But then he goes and beats Zverev again at the Tour Finals. And maybe even more impressively than that, it wasn't the Zverev win. It was the Medvedev win. He worked Medvedev indoors in Torino, if we want to be official. In a way, I've just, like, even 2 years ago, physically, he didn't have the chops in the corners to hang for that long with Daniil Medvedev. And it needs to be written, like, if there was someone on the American tennis beat, Michael Russell doesn't come up enough in Coach of the Year conversations, but the way he has gotten Taylor Fritz to just maximize everything. It was never a redevelopment. It was a, we know what you're good at. Let's maximize those things. We know where you're not good. Let's just try to get you as good as we can be from a movement perspective. He's never going to be Carlos Alcaraz as an athlete, but he's certainly competent as a mover, uses his size extraordinarily well, anticipates so well. He is never going to be a good volleyer. Not ever. We've learned that. He knows when to move forward. He knows where to be, even if the execution is still shaky. Just the commitment to know that I need to move forward. My ground strokes just give me such easy opportunities that all I have to do is make the frickin' volley. It's how he has continued to improve on the margins. And so to your point, to get to your question, what's left for Taylor Fritz? I would point out he finished outside the top 25 in break percentage. That's surprising to me, at least intuitively, because this is a guy who puts a lot of returns in play. This guy who uses his length extraordinarily well to, at the very least, get the serve return in the center of his racket and get that ball back with at least some sort of depth. Now, why I imagine he struggles, we've all seen it. Against elite +1s, like, he just doesn't have that quickness in the outer thirds to be elite against that sort of weaponry. But short of that elite weaponry, and again, I'd go back to the Medvedev match, Taylor Fritz is going to work you. Like, he is kind of in that Zverev category of he is just going to be fit enough for the match. He is not going to break down physically at the end of it, even if he isn't the most explosive human in the world. 20.2 break percentage last year. Again, the prior 2 seasons, he was 24-7 and 22-5. That feels like a low-hanging fruit for him to just clean some things up, maybe on second serve returns and picking his spots a little bit better. But again, Taylor Fritz this season, not only the first Slam final, it was the first season he had real success against top players in the world. 11-10 against top 10 opponents. That trailed only Sinner and Alcaraz. Third most top 10 wins on the year. Do I think there's another step? I don't. I think this is where he lives. But to be a 4 through 10 guy, it's a good freaking place for Taylor Fritz to find himself. And for the first time, I guess, I'm ready to accept that, if that makes sense.
The goal should just be staying there. Yeah, because I just think Sinner, Alcaraz, Zverev tier at this time, Djokovic, depending on how he is, right? I do think that's a bridge too far for Taylor, but if you can stay in the 4-5 range, like we've seen over the years, if you can be a David Ferrer or a Daniil Medvedev for a couple of years, like you might get that chance. He was in his major final, obviously, at the end of the year. But yeah, ultimately, I think the goal needs to be staying there. I think he can do it. The thing that I would point to in terms of, is this the real ceiling? I don't think he accepts that. I watch him play these matches against top guys. I watch him play against a Jannik Sinner or a Carlos Alcaraz, and just what his body language looks like throughout the match. And you can even look after that U.S. Open final against Sinner. Like, the guy was pissed at himself for losing. He was absolutely beside himself. That's the mentality. He has always had that max competitive streak. And I think anybody who has followed him at all has been able to see that. That's going to serve him well, because there are some things that he can continue to just polish up a little bit. This was the best I've ever seen him volley this year. Yeah, not stellar, but better and better out of the corner. So he's made those improvements. And you know what? Mentally, I just think he's going to keep pushing himself, which is why I actually have some confidence that Taylor Fritz can have a couple of years in the top 5 kind of range. Let's go to
quickly. The single most notable part about Breakpoint was that it confirmed what those of us who know him a little bit better always knew, but it told you, the tennis public. Taylor Fritz cares about one thing: being the best tennis player he can be. Like, that is what he is solely dedicated to. It's not about the social life. It's not about the extracurriculars, the off-court things. He is in the gym. He is playing video games to rest his body, and then he's back on court again to do more training, and he's feeding himself appropriately. This is a guy who is all about maximizing his tennis career. I agree with you. Holding serve, staying put in the rankings, that's a massive win for him in 2025. It will be fascinating to see if he's able to sustain.
All right, Daniil Medvedev, is tier 1 over? Because this wasn't a tier 1 year. Look, he's 28. You know, this is what I'll say. The results have been the results recently. I think everybody can see that Medvedev, not only in the last year, but if you take the sample of the last 3 years, there have been a lot of moments where you're thinking, all right, like, there seems to be a gap between him and the very, very best. And there were a lot of years where you couldn't really say that. You know, he was pushing Novak Djokovic when Djokovic was the best in the world and all that. He's only 28. So it's not like the age number would be like, yup, this is all downhill from here. But the tennis itself is revealing some concerns.
Well, first, as someone who's 4 months older than Daniil Medvedev, I agree. It's not downhill quite yet. Secondly, again, we'll know we've made it as each of us when the tennis letter starts posting, not Andy Roddick, but Gill Gross asks, is Daniil Medvedev washed? And Alex Gruskin responds, maybe. I think it's one of the questions of the look. Spoiler alert: it's going to be a big theme at Cracked Racquets this month. The theme of the month is the next gen, and will we have a second lost generation? And Daniil Medvedev has separated himself from that conversation because he did win that 2021 U.S. Open title, and again, for the last 5 years, has been the best non-Novak Djokovic hard court player in the world. This is the first season since 2019 when you say, hey, who's the best hardcore player in the world? You answer someone else than Medvedev. Like, it is Jannik Sinner now. Medvedev has had his throne usurped by a younger talent. And the biggest red flag for Daniil Medvedev isn't the losses that he took and what the record looks like. It's who the losses were to and what they looked like. The problems he has tactically, not mentally, tactically, against Sinner and Alcaraz, I don't know what he can do to solve those structurally. Because, again, I know the 2023 U.S. Open wasn't that long ago, and those 4 sets, his win over Alcaraz, that's the best I've ever seen Daniil Medvedev play. That was literally 13, 14 months ago. But it's a different world now. Like, Trump got reelected.
Look,
it's a different world. Like, Sinner and Alcaraz are the real deal. And how aggressive they play is built to take advantage of those 12 feet behind the baseline game styles. So it's the question for me of the offseason. Is the next-gen window closed?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Medvedev person right now, you're hanging on to a couple of matches. You're hanging on to that Alcaraz win at the U.S. Open, the Sinner win at Wimbledon. If those are the outliers, if you look at those two head-to-heads. And there have been a lot of matches where you're right, like Daniil hasn't just lost. He's looked like he has hit a wall in those matchups and that there have been like unsolvable problems for him. I am not optimistic about either head-to-head right now. And what I've been saying about Medvedev when people are like, what does he need to do, is that serve needs to go back to being a bomb, but that shoulder might be shot. Like, there is a chance that the shoulder's done, that it's not going to really come back. And I think if that's the case, then my answer would be yes, tier 1 Medvedev is over, because he's not going to make up for it off the ground. And he has tried. He is trying to ramp up the forehand. He's trying to hit bigger off the ground. Then he just loses what makes him so magic, which is the fact that he never freaking misses a ground stroke, which was true for the 6 years of his quote unquote prime that we've seen. And that kind of went away this year, where the forehand, okay, now it misses. The backhand, sometimes it misses. At the U.S. Open, right, against Sinner, like, the backhand was not consistent. And that just wasn't a thing for Medvedev for many, many years. And he was getting way more out of his serve. So
Beats
I think
2 sets
we
to
both
down.
Agree.
Yeah, and was 2 sets to love up on Sinner at last year's Australian Open.
Yes.
Like, it is hot takey to say the reign of Medvedev is over. But given how predicated his success was on physicality, if that drops off even 2%, that's a 2% that makes a significant difference for a guy whose improvisational talent and consistency in those moments are what made him special. It's the question. I couldn't agree with you more. Is the window for Medvedev closed? My inclination is he's still a 5-8 guy. My inclination is he's still the first non-tier 1 guy you talk about on hard courts, and I'm going to give him tier 1 benefit of the doubt going into Australia, but he's on watch. He'll be a make-or-break all-star. Fascinating offseason how his shoulder recovers ahead.
Casper Ruud at 6 in the world had an odd season. The vast majority of his wins came in the first half. It was a tale of 2 seasons for Ruud on all surfaces. If you go up until Roland Garros, it was a really, really phenomenal year. And then it was pretty mediocre after that. My question for Ruud is, what happened to the 2022 hardcourt results? That was a year where he made the Miami final. He made the semis in Canada. He made the final at the U.S. Open, and he made the final at the year-end championships in Turin, which is oddly like an indoor hardcourt that he tends to have success on, even though he doesn't have success on any of the others. But to me, it's like, I'm a little confused about who Casper is. I get who he is on clay. I think he did kind of knock out a big milestone this year. He needed to win a title above 250. He won Barcelona. He beat an informed Stefanos Tsitsipas to do it. It was a good run. I'm just a little bit puzzled by how drastically things trailed off there.
Yeah, it's really well said, and I would point out again, the clay court resume is not in doubt. Like, going into the French Open, let's remember, it was a legitimate conversation. Are Ruud and Tsitsipas tier 1 contenders for the title? Like, that's how good Casper Ruud was in not only beating Tsitsipas, but throughout the course of the clay court run up to Roland Garros. And one could argue if he didn't get ill before that semifinal against Zverev, he wins that match. He gets to the final against Alcaraz, but that doesn't matter. Like, the clay courts are 3 months of the year. And yes, Casper Ruud is the best possible version of a clay court specialist. But for a guy who even earlier in his 20s made a U.S. Open final, and even beyond that, it was the plethora of quarterfinals he made in places like Cincinnati and Toronto and Dubai or Doha. Maybe that's wrong, but just every part of the calendar, or Acapulco, that's what I was thinking of. It's just he was competing in every portion of the calendar. He hasn't really done that the last 2 seasons. And yeah, I agree. That's befuddling to me because structurally his game should work on hard courts. Like, the forehand is still a weapon. The serve can still hit the spots. And his backhand doesn't seem like that much of a liability. Like, it doesn't compute for me why he's had those struggles, which gets back to your point. Like, I think if Casper just came out and said, look, guys, I'm not playing in July. Like, I hate grass courts. You all know that. I'm sorry, Wimbledon, but I'm just out. And I'm going to use that month as a reset every year. Like, are we at the point where it's something as drastic as that? Like, where it's just like,
no, go the other way. Why not go the other way? He hasn't played the Wimbledon lead-ins. He has taken that. And then he's never been the same second half. And you could say, well, it's because the clay court events are over. But he needs to look very hard at why the second half for him has been such a struggle, other than 2022, where it wasn't as much the case. But it's like, is he getting burnt out? Is there something missing there about just how he's managing himself? Because he takes that break after clay court season, and that usually, or 2 years in a row, that's kind of been the line that you draw.
No, it's just like, we're long removed from the days of him sweeping Stade and Bostad and having that massive month of July, right? Where it kind of built all that momentum, in 22 and 21. And yeah, it's just like, it's puzzling because I don't get it structurally. His game should work on those surfaces, and it gets back to my theme of the offseason. Next gen's in trouble. Like, it is crazy. We might have a second generation just completely passed over at the majors. Yeah. And yet, like, if I gave you the over-under of half for Medvedev, Zverev, Tsitsipas, Rublev, I'd even throw Ruud in that group, like half a major title collectively amongst them all moving forward. Or not half, but 1.5? Do you take the under?
Probably not, but you have to think about it. Your point is a good one. Look, at the end of the day, you rewind 3 years ago, and or more than that, and you listen to how people were talking about these guys, Zverev,
myself included.
Right? It was like, yeah, these are locks to win slams. Like, this is not a conversation, and that ended up not being correct.
Question was, could Medvedev get to 5 hardcore major titles? Right. Now it's like, does he have another one left? He's going to get to 2.
Yeah, that's what happens, right? Like, I don't want to get into a philosophical discussion, but none of those guys were the generational tier 1 that was can't miss. When we saw Alcaraz, it didn't take long to figure out, like, oh, that's the multi-slam winner. Like, that's totally different.
I stand by. I once said on No Challenges Remaining, our friend Ben Rothenberg's podcast, that of all the guys out there, and this was like 4 years ago, Sasha Zverev's the one who I could see winning 10 major titles. Not that he would, but it's just like, I still stand by from a tennis standpoint. He's a can't miss prospect. Like, he's Daryl Morey's creation, as I've said before, of a tennis player in a lab. The problem is we forgot to build the brain. Like, it is crazy. I agree. We won't get philosophical, but we need Ruud to be the guy who beat Alcaraz, not the guy in every other part of the season on hard courts, if the next gen's going to have a chance.
Number 7, Novak Djokovic. I wrote, are the legs still there? And everybody, look, motivation is going to be the top storyline. And I was kind of banging this drum for a long time, when Djokovic's body wasn't going down at all. Like, there was zero detectable decline, almost zero. It's maybe a slight hyperbole. I was saying, like, wow, if his body holds up like this, then the only thing that's going to stop him is motivation. But I do think lost in the narrative here is, if you watch Djokovic in 2023, he looked a half a step slower. And, I saw Tennis Insights still had him as one of the highest steal scorers on tour. So he is still excellent defensively. I think that has a lot to do with just the ball that he hits out of the corner. But I saw the speed decline this year in a big way. And I don't know if that was a blip. I don't know if that was the knee. I don't know if that had something to do with the funky season that he had, or if Djokovic is actually starting to show the physical decline. So the motivation is the obvious low-hanging fruit for him, but I think the legs are also a real question here.
I couldn't agree with you more. Now, let's be clear. He did the only thing he wanted to do in 2024. He won the Olympics. It's it's an unequivocal some scale of A, because that's all he needed coming out of the season, and he did it. You are also
It was a pass-fail season. He passed.
Second semester, and he's in the second semester senior portion of his career. You should be taking things pass-fail. Like, here's the thing. He passed that. He failed at the other four majors. Like, maybe Wimbledon not included, but to lose in straights the way he did to Alcaraz, like, I don't think any of us saw that lopsided of a loss coming. He got blitzed at the Australian Open. That's the worst major loss I've ever seen him take to Sinner, just how convincing it was. And, again, the miraculous defense at the French Open run, great. But to the theme more broadly, like, look at the Nardi match, or look at, I don't know, pick a name out of a hat this season. Like, it wasn't vintage Novak Djokovic who's down a set in 3-1 and says, all right, I'll start trying now, fine. Like, he just couldn't hit that gear as easily. And guess what? 37 years old. He shouldn't be able to hit that gear as easily as he was able to do, even as recently as 2 years ago, let alone last season. Motivation's the biggest thing, because we did see him turn it on for a week in Paris, and I just don't see a world where he doesn't win at least one more major title. I do think he still has 2 good weeks of tennis consecutively in him, but it gets back to your point. The question is all about motivation, because I agree with you. The legs aren't going to be there as consistently as they were in the past, and he needs to come in fit and focused, and maybe with even a little bit of a runway of play beneath him. Yeah. And it's just going to be fascinating to see where he picks to do that this season.
Right. I mean, it's hard to flip the switch on and off. And, like, I don't know what to make of the fact that he only played Shanghai after the US Open. I think if I have stock in Djokovic, if I'm rooting for Djokovic, I don't like that. Like, now, obviously, again, like, he's reached a point in his career where it's like everything's a bonus now. Like, the stakes aren't huge for his success the rest of the way, although it would be a nice round number to hit 25 and to have that one, at least one more. But I don't know how to interpret the post-US Open thing, because that's now twice last season where we saw him basically, in my eyes, just not muster the motivation to even show, right? Because March, like Miami, he wasn't injured at Miami, just couldn't get himself to really want to do it. And I see ATP finals the same way. I know he said he was injured, but he was already saying that he might not play before he was injured.
Yeah. I mean, even the run to the Shanghai final, like, he wasn't that, like, yeah, he made the final. I didn't think he was playing particularly impressive tennis. Like,
no, but I mean, that was also sort of, it's kind of cool that you can still make the Shanghai final when you're when you're on autopilot, cruise control, like,
which is what I was going to get back to, which is actually, though, the case for, like, yeah, but he can still turn it on when he needs to. Like, even his autopilot is, top 15 club, finishing top 15 in both hold and break percentage, one of 4 players you say that about. Zverev, him, Alcaraz, Sinner. His worst season since 2006, and he's still one of the 4 best players in the world.
Yep. Andrey Rublev at number 8. My question is the psychology ever changing? This was a weird Rublev year, because I think for a while it was just accepted. Andrey is Andrey. Let's talk about if he can make a major semifinal. Let's talk about if he can add a backhand slice. Let's talk about if he can start to volley. Let's talk about if he can beef up the second serve. Did a good job of that, by the way. Plenty of things. There's some backhand stuff. Like, there's technical stuff to talk about with Andrey, and I wonder, okay, is he going to get better there? This was a year where I thought the psychological stuff sort of overshadowed it, because you had the Dubai blow up, you had the Madrid title when he was sick as a dog and clearly just not feeling like, basically the pressure was totally off, and he wins a Masters 1000 title, and there's a lot of just weird stuff happening in his year. Then he goes on another big losing streak. He gets to play a Masters final against Alexei Popyrin, does not perform in that match. It was odd all around. Like, and then US Open, Dimitrov, he's back to kind of I thought Grigor played incredible in that match. I don't think it was a bad loss for Andrey, but mentally it seemed like the volatility was hurting him. And I haven't always felt that way, but there certainly hasn't been any progress there. Are we just accepting it's always going to be like this for Rublev? Because I thought maybe the Dubai thing would be a turning point. It was not.
It's hard not to, given it's been 6 consecutive seasons. And again, Jeff Sackman tweeted out this statistic. I think he's one of 2 players. It's him and Richie Reneberg, whatever, who made 5 straight years of tour finals without a single major final, let alone a single major semifinal during that 5-year stretch. And you're just like, that stat tells you who Andrey Rublev is. Like, he is one of the 8 best players in the world. He is unequivocally not one of the tier 1 players in the world. And by the way, like, that's fine. He's never going to need to work a second job in his life. That's the goal for all of these professional tennis players. Let's be clear in how we want to frame things. There's also, though, the framing of, look, Andrey Rublev, this is a former world junior #1. This is a guy who we've seen, I don't want to say go toe-to-toe with the best of the best, even if he hasn't often been on the winning side of those battles. I mean, I just so thoroughly think we know who he is. Like, again, I agree. If he didn't have the title, the 1,000 level title run in Madrid earlier this year, like his final, I guess I would say who Andrey Rublev was post Wimbledon to the end of the year, like that was his regression to the mean, where it's just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make a Canada final. Oh yeah, I'm gonna make U.S. Open 4th round, and oh by the way, I'm still gonna work my way into the tour finals, where this year was 0-3 instead of 1-2. I know who he is. He's a very good player. Do I think he will be again, it's a great career. He's not a tier 1 guy, but he's a very, very good player. He is a 6 through 11 guy.
Yeah. Look, I think he's improved a lot of stuff, though. Like, he hits his second serve bigger. He has. Okay. I will mark my foot down on that. His second serve is much bigger now. His movement is a little better, and he does handle the big matches better. Now, there were some shaky moments this year, but it was really bad in his early 20s. Like, any big pressure match, you just weren't getting the Andrey Rublev that you want to be getting. And that's why it took him as long as it did to win a big title. And that's why some of those quarterfinal performances were disappointing, whereas recently they've just been more bad draws. So he's gotten better in some areas, and there are other areas where he hasn't gotten better, like variety and composure. All right.
If I'm going after any spot in the tour finals field, his is the most vulnerable. His is the one I want to take next year. Because, again, there are only 8 spots. His is the one that feels the most vulnerable.
That's fair. Let me tell you this. He burned me 2 years in a row in my preseason predictions, where I'm like, you know what? I'm not really seeing it. I think there are other guys who I'm more excited about. I predict Rublev outside of I think I predicted his fall out of the top 10 2 years in a row. He proved me wrong 2 years in a row. So I've been there. I'm just saying.
Third's the lucky charm.
No, because this year I didn't do it, and then I was almost wrong on Rublev the other way this year. So, Andrey fans, just hope I come give him a negative prediction.
The best joke you've ever told is that he'll go 1-2 at tour finals for the rest of his life, and we'll all be like, yeah, it's about right.
That does it for part 1 of the off-season's question show. Part 2 will feature players ranked number 9 through number 21, because I didn't want to leave out Ben Shelton. So definitely stay tuned for part 2, which will drop on the channel, YouTube, anywhere you get your podcasts this week. See ya.